The first time I slipped death into their food, it tasted like honey and warm cinnamon, sweet enough to smother the bitterness of the herbs that would rot them from the inside out. Master Hiram Beaumont smiled as he ate the pandamise I served that morning, never realizing each bite carried 25 years of my hatred. Ground fine as flour and mixed with the old magic my grower had once taught me in the hidden corners of Haiti. My name is Celeste, and I am the woman who delivered justice one meal at a time, the woman who learned that sometimes the only way to stop wickedness is to feed it back to the mouths that created it. But before I tell you how I made the Beaumont family pay for their cruelty, I must tell you about the blood that finally pushed me past the point where mercy could exist. It was a Tuesday morning in September of 1854, and the Louisiana heat hung over the Tibido Plantation like a curse waiting to take shape. I had been cooking for the Beaumont family for 25 years, ever since I was 20 and freshly torn from the auction block. I'd been bought because Master Hiram had heard that enslaved people from Haiti carried secrets about food, secrets that could make a white man's table the envy of an entire parish. He was right about that, though not in the way he imagined. The Beaumonts lived in a grand house with white pillars and curtains of Spanish moss, surrounded by 3,000 acres of sugarcane fattened on the blood and sweat of 200 enslaved souls. Master Hiram was 48, a man who had inherited both his wealth and his cruelty from generations before him. Mistress Evelyn, at 42, was a woman who found delight in the suffering of others, perhaps because there was no joy left anywhere within her own life. Their children, Marybelle and Pierce, were 14 and 12, still young enough to be shaped by what they saw, but old enough to know right from wrong. Marybelle had her mother's golden hair, but her father's cold, unblinking eyes, while Pierce was quiet and thoughtful, often watching the ugliness around her with confusion and a growing disgust. But it was not the children who earned my hatred. It was their parents, who had turned the simple running of a household into a theater of cruelty where enslaved people were punished for the smallest mistakes. 50 lashes for breaking an egg, a red-hot iron pressed to the skin for spilling milk, fingers smashed with a hammer for dropping flour, salt rubbed into wounds for moving too slowly. These were not punishments meant to correct. They were entertainments, designed to gratify people who had too much power and too little humanity. From my kitchen, I watched strong men reduced to trembling, whimpering shells. I held dying women in my arms after the beatings went too far. I swallowed my rage for 25 years, telling myself survival mattered more than justice, that keeping quiet protected not only me but the others who depended on my presence in that kitchen. But on that Tuesday morning in September, something inside me finally broke. Little Moses was 8 years old, the son of Big Sam, who worked the fields, and Mama Ruth, who tended the gardens. Moses was a sweet child with bright eyes and a quick, eager smile, the kind of boy who should have been playing with toys, not hauling heavy pitchers of milk from the dairy to the big house. But enslaved children were not allowed to be children for long on the Beaumont plantation. By 6, they were expected to work, to understand that their lives held value only in how well they served their owners. Moses had been carrying milk to the dining room when it happened. The pitcher was heavy, nearly as big as he was, and his small hands were slick with morning dew. As he climbed the back steps, his foot caught on a loose board. He stumbled. The pitcher slipped from his grasp, shattering against the wooden steps, sending milk and pottery shards flying. It was an accident, something that could happen to anyone, child or adult, enslaved or free. But in the twisted world of the Beaumonts, accidents were crimes, and crimes demanded punishment. Mistress Evelyn heard the crash and came running, her face twisted with fury before she even saw what had happened. When she spotted little Moses standing among the broken pieces and spilled milk, her eyes lit with a cruel delight that made my stomach churn. "You clumsy little creature," she shrieked, grabbing him by the ear and dragging him toward the house. "Do you know what that milk cost? Do you know what that pitcher was worth?" Moses burst into tears, trying to explain, "I'm sorry, mistress. I didn't mean to. It was an accident." But Evelyn was beyond listening. She was already drunk on the thrill of what she intended to do next. She hauled him inside and shouted for her husband, her voice slicing through the air like a hunting bird. "Hiram, come here." This little beast destroyed my good pitcher and wasted a gallon of milk. He needs a lesson. Master Hiram emerged from his study wearing the expression of a man eager for the spectacle that awaited him. In his hand was his favorite whip, a leather lash reserved for punishing children, crafted to inflict maximum pain without leaving damage that might lessen their value. "Strip him," Hiram ordered. I watched in horror as they tore the clothes from Moses' trembling body, leaving him naked and shivering in the morning heat. "Please," Moses whispered through his tears. "I didn't mean to break it. I'll be more careful." "You'll be more careful because you'll remember this lesson every time you touch something that belongs to me," Hiram replied, lifting the whip high. What followed was 20 minutes of torture I will carry with me until the end of my life. Hiram brought the whip down on Moses' small back again and again, each strike raising welts and drawing blood, while Evelyn stood beside him counting strokes and directing where to aim. "Lower," she said after the 10th lash. "He should feel it when he sits." "Harder," she demanded after the 15th. "He's not crying loud enough." "Again," she commanded after the 20th. "He hasn't learned anything yet." I stood in the kitchen doorway, forced to watch. Running would only bring more punishment on Moses and on me. I had seen monstrous cruelties over the years, things that would shame even the devil. But watching a grown man brutalize an 8-year-old child for an accident pushed me past my final limit. When it was over, Moses collapsed, his tiny body covered in blood and swollen welts, barely conscious. Hiram and Evelyn stood over him like hunters admiring a kill, their faces flushed in the thrill of inflicting pain. "Animals will learn to be more careful with my things," Evelyn remarked, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she looked down at Moses. "Clean him up and get him back to work," Hiram added, speaking as if Moses were nothing more than a damaged tool that could still be put to use. I carried Moses into my kitchen and tended to his wounds as best I could, using the healing knowledge my grandmother had taught me. Right alongside the darker art she'd whispered only in shadow. As I washed the blood from his fragile back and pressed herbs into the cuts to ward off infection, I made a decision that would alter the course of everything. "Mama Celeste," Moses whispered as I worked, his voice trembling, "why do they hurt us so much? What did we do wrong?" "You didn't do nothing wrong, baby," I said, keeping my voice steady even as rage rose inside me like a storm ready to break. Some people got evil in their hearts, and they take out on folks who can't fight back. Will they always hurt us? I looked down at this shattered little boy, this innocent child brutalized for crime of simply existing in a world that refused to see him as human, and something cold and unbreakable settled inside my chest. "No, baby," I said quietly. "They won't hurt us much longer." That night, once the plantation fell quiet and sleep settled over the big house, I stole away into the darkness. The only sounds were the crickets and the faint, sorrowful singing drifting from quarters. I walked to the place where my grandmother had taught me to gather power, the old cemetery where countless enslaved people rested beneath unmarked earth. Grandmother Urzul had been a mambo back in Haiti, a priestess of the old ways, taken in chains to Louisiana, but never one allowing those chains to touch her spirit. She had taught me the secrets white folks feared most, that there were powers in this world that Christianity could never reach, forces that obeyed laws older and deeper than anything in their books. "Celeste," she told me when I was just a girl, "the Loire are always listening. They see every injustice, every cruelty, every drop of innocent blood spilled. And when the time comes to restore balance, they'll use whatever vessel is willing to deliver justice." I never truly understood her words until that night, kneeling among the graves of my ancestors, feeling their spirits shift and rise in answer to my call. The ritual I prepared was one grandmother had taught me long ago, a ritual she warned I must never use unless I was prepared to pay its price. It was a working of vengeance, a summoning of the darkest aspects of the Loire, to bring justice to those who had escaped earthly judgment. I gathered dirt from the graves of children who had died beneath the lash, mixing it with herbs that grew only in the cemetery's shadow. I added my own blood, drawn under the dark moon and blessed with the old words Gromera had whispered into my ear when no one else could hear. Most importantly, I collected pieces of Hiram and Evelyn, hair from their brushes, threads pulled from their clothing, nail clippings hidden away in their chambers. These things created the spiritual tether that allowed the curse to find them no matter where they ran or how they tried to hide. As I worked, I felt the Wa gathering around me, ancient spirits who had watched centuries of suffering and were hungry to see justice finally done. Their voices rose like wine through Spanish moss, instructing me precisely what to do and how to do it without leaving a trace. The curse I wove that night was no simple poison meant to kill quickly. No, what I crafted was far more elegant, far more terrible. A slow rot that would devour Hiram and Evelyn from the inside while they still breathed. Their flesh would decay day by day, turning them into walking corpses who would feel every moment of their own unraveling. But the Wa demanded fairness. The curse would touch only those who had reveled in cruelty. Marybelle and Pierce would remain untouched, so long as their hearts remained innocent of their parents' sins. As dawn crept across the cemetery, I completed the ritual and felt the power settle into my bones like a burning fever. The curse was ready. All it needed was the one thing Hiram and Evelyn trusted completely: the food I placed before them every day. I returned to my kitchen as the plantation stirred awake and began preparing breakfast just as I had every morning for 25 years. But this time, I added special ingredients to the coffee and the pandan bread that would grace the Beaumont table. Ingredients that would begin the slow, inevitable justice demanded by Moses' spilled blood. Hiram and Evelyn ate eagerly, praising the flavors as they always did, entirely unaware that they were swallowing their own downfall. "Excellent as always, Celeste," Hiram said, licking crumbs from his lips. "You truly are a treasure." "Yes, sir," I replied softly, my face obedient but my heart steady with purpose. I lived to serve. As I cleared their plates and watched them leave the room, I whispered a prayer to Gromera's spirit. Let them rot as they have made others rot. Let them suffer as they have made others suffer. Let them taste the cruelty they fed to the innocent. The curse had been cast. The die was thrown. There was no turning back. In a few days, Hiram and Evelyn Beaumont would learn what it meant to be powerless, what it meant to be at the mercy of forces they could not command, to feel the same agony they had inflicted on others for so many years. Justice was coming to Plantation Tibido, one meal at a time. The first sign appeared 3 days later. Master Hiram was seated at the dining table, cutting into the boudin noir I prepared for lunch, when he suddenly pushed the plate away in disgust. "This tastes wrong," he muttered, his face twisting. "It tastes like something dead." I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, my expression arranged into polite concern, while satisfaction warmed my chest like coals catching flame. The curse had begun its work, turning his own senses against him, making even the finest food reek of rot and decay. "I'm sorry, Master Hiram," I said, stepping forward and sampling a small piece. "It tastes fine to me. Perhaps you're feeling unwell." He narrowed his eyes at me but took another cautious bite. The reaction was immediate. His face contorted with nausea, and he spat the meat back onto the plate. "No, there's something definitely wrong with it," he insisted. "It tastes like putrid flesh. How could you serve me something like this?" Evelyn, eating the same dish without complaint, glanced at him in confusion. "Hiram, darling, my boudin tastes perfectly normal. Perhaps you're catching an illness." But Hiram was convinced the food was spoiled. He refused to eat anything else I prepared that day and demanded the presence of Dr. Rousseau, the family physician. After examining him thoroughly, the doctor shook his head. "Your pulse is normal. Your temperature is normal. Your color looks good," he said. "I can find nothing physically wrong. I believe you may simply be experiencing a temporary digestive disturbance," Dr. Rousseau said gently. "Eat lightly for a few days and see if it clears up." But the problem did not clear up. Over the next week, Hiram's aversion to food intensified and grew strangely specific. Everything I cooked for him tasted, he said, like death. Like meat left out in the sun for days, or vegetables pulled from the earth long after they'd rotted away. He began to shed weight at an alarming pace, his once round face hollowing until his cheekbones jutted like sharp stones. His clothes sagged off his body. Dark smudges clung beneath his eyes, and a sickly yellow undertone crept across his skin, making him look like a man already drifting toward the grave. Evelyn, meanwhile, was suffering a different torment. Her once beautiful golden hair fell out in thick, heartbreaking clumps, leaving bald patches she tried desperately to conceal under scars and wigs. Her fingernails cracked, split, and peeled away. Her gums bled whenever she ran a brush across her teeth. "I don't understand what's happening to us," she whispered to her friend Mrs. Tremaine during one of their afternoon visits. "Hiram can barely keep food down, and my body is falling apart. It feels as though we've been cursed." Mrs. Tremaine, a devout Catholic with no patience for what she considered foolish superstition, scoffed immediately. "Nonsense, Evelyn. Curses are fairy tales. You're probably dealing with some tropical disease. Have you checked the water?" But I knew better. The curse was unfolding exactly as Grandmère had taught me it would, assaulting their spiritual core and manifesting as fleshly decay. Hiram and Evelyn were rotting from the inside out, their bodies reflecting the corruption of their souls. The most satisfying part was watching how their decline stripped them of the power they once wielded like a whip. Hiram, weakened by hunger and sickness, no longer had the strength for the brutal beatings he had once delighted in. Evelyn, ashamed of her failing appearance and crushed by her own suffering, abandoned her daily inspections that had terrified us for decades. For the first time in 25 years, the plantation tasted something like peace. People worked without the constant dread of punishment hanging over them like a blade. Faces that had been carved with despair began to show flickers of hope. Little Moses, the child whose suffering had pushed me beyond mercy, was healing beautifully. The welts on his back were fading, and more importantly, he was smiling again, playing again, acting at last like the 8-year-old he deserved to be. "Mama Celeste," he asked one evening as I stirred a pot of gumbo laced with herbs meant to deepen the curse, "Master Hiram ain't hurt nobody in weeks. You think he's getting nicer?" "I think he's learning what suffering feels like," I replied, gently stirring the pot. Sometimes people must taste pain before they recognize how wrong it is to inflict it. But Hiram and Evelyn were not learning compassion. They were growing paranoid and desperate. As their symptoms worsened, they became convinced someone was poisoning them. They hired a food taster, a young enslaved woman named Susanna, who was forced to sample every dish before it reached their table. They rotated cooks, believing one of us must be responsible. They even sent meals to chemists in New Orleans, hoping for answers, but nothing helped. There was no earthly poison for them to uncover, no toxin that could be traced or barred from their plates. Their sickness came from a deeper place, a spiritual rot fed by their own cruelty and shaped by the righteous fury of the ones they had harmed. Dr. Rousseau was completely baffled. He summoned 2 additional physicians for consultation. Dr. Blanchard from Baton Rouge arrived first, examining them carefully before declaring they suffered from some unknown tropical illness. Dr. DeMar from New Orleans suggested it might be a strange new form of yellow fever. None of their remedies made any difference. Hiram continued wasting away, his body consuming itself as it rejected every scrap of nourishment. Evelyn's collapse accelerated. Her hair vanished entirely, and her skin took on a grayish tint that made her resemble a corpse dragged from a river. But the most horrifying symptom was the smell. A sweet, cloying stench of decay began to seep from them both, growing thicker each day, as though their bodies were decomposing from within while they were still alive. "I've never encountered anything like this," Dr. Rousseau confessed during one visit, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's as though your bodies are breaking down before death. I have read similar cases recorded in Caribbean journals, but I always assumed they were exaggerations." "What are you saying?" Hiram demanded weakly, though the old arrogance still lingered in his tone, that we're victims of some sort of voodoo curse. Dr. Rousseau hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I am saying only that there are forces in this world beyond the reach of medical science. Louisiana has a long history of unusual phenomena. It may be wise to speak with someone versed in such matters. But Hiram's pride, bloated and foolish until the end, would not allow him to accept the possibility. He refused to consult any practitioners of the old ways, insisting there had to be a rational explanation. Meanwhile, I continued to prepare their meals. Each dish was crafted with precision, seasoned with ingredients that bound their souls to the pain they had inflicted. I stirred graveyard soil into their coffee, mixed with herbs meant to anchor the curse. I seasoned their meats with powders made from the bones of children lost to the lash, ensuring those lost voices would finally be heard. And most important of all, I included my own blood blessed by the law and charged with righteous vengeance. Every drop carried the weight of 25 years of swallowed screams, hidden tears, and unbearable injustice. The children, Marybelle and Pierce, remained untouched. I prepared their meals separately with clean water and pure ingredients. I even whispered protective charms over their plates, shielding them from the sins of their parents. Marybelle, now 15, was beginning to recognize the severity of her parents' decline. She spent long hours reading medical texts, trying to understand the horror unraveling her family. One afternoon, as I chopped vegetables for dinner, she approached me quietly. "Celeste," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to ask you something about my mother and father." As I prepared the evening meal, Marie stood quietly beside me and finally asked, "Celeste, do you think my parents are going to die?" I looked at her, this young woman who had grown up in a home of cruelty, yet somehow managed to hold on to her humanity, and a pang of sympathy tugged at my chest. She was innocent of her parents' sins, and soon she would be orphaned by the justice I had summoned. "I don't know, Miss Marie," I answered truthfully, "but I think you should prepare yourself for that possibility. Sometimes when people do wrong for a long time, that wrong circles back in ways they never expect." Marie studied my face for a long moment, and I could see understanding forming behind her eyes. She was clever, a child of Louisiana soil, a place where the old ways were whispered in kitchens and carried in the wind. She understood far more than she was saying. "Celeste," she said softly, "if someone had hurt you or the others, and you had the power to make them pay, would you?" It was a dangerous question, one that could have cost me my life if spoken by the wrong person. But I saw no malice in her eyes, only fear, confusion, and a young woman trying to make sense of the world she had inherited. "Miss Marie," I said carefully, "I believe everything we do comes back to us someday. Good brings good, and evil brings evil. Your parents, they've done many cruel things, and now they're facing the consequences." Marie nodded slowly. She understood. She would never say it aloud, but she understood. Weeks passed, and Hiram and Evelyn continued to crumble. Hiram became a ghost. Skin stretched thin over bones, his face hollowed, his once commanding voice reduced to a faint rasp. Evelyn's deterioration was even more grotesque. Her hair vanished entirely. Her fingernails fell away, and her skin turned mottled like swamp flesh pulled from the water. Worst of all was the smell, an overpowering sweetness of decay that clung to them like a second skin. House servants refused to enter their rooms, gagging even from the doorway. But the most satisfying change was inside them. The arrogance that had ruled their lives evaporated. Fear took its place. They begged doctors for cures, promised impossible sums of money, even attempted to show a kindness they had never offered before. A desperate kindness born not of remorse, but of terror. It was too late for kindness. The curse ran deeper than anything compassion could undo, and the law do not forgive those who gave no mercy in life. 6 weeks after their first cursed breakfast, Hiram Beaumont died in his bed. His body simply surrendered. Just before the end, he whispered to Dr. Rousseau, barely audible, "Something is eating me from the inside." Evelyn followed 2 weeks later, and her death was far worse. In her final days, She screamed and moaned at visions no one else could see. She claimed the spirits of the enslaved she had tormented stood around her bed, pointing, calling her name, demanding justice. "They're here," she gasped to Marie the night before she died. "All of them. Everyone we hurt. They're waiting for me. They're gonna make me pay." "Mama, please," Marie whispered, holding her skeletal hand. "You're sick. You're imagining things." But Evelyn shook her head with the last of her strength. "No, they're real. And they're right to be angry. Your father and I, we did terrible things. Terrible things. And now the time has come." She died just before dawn, her last breath carrying the sweet rot that had clung to her for weeks. The undertaker, horrified by her condition, insisted the funeral be closed casket, saying her appearance was too grotesque for public viewing. With both parents gone, Marie and Pierce were placed under the guardianship of their aunt in New Orleans, a gentle woman who had always opposed her brother's cruelty but had been powerless to stop it. The plantation was sold to cover debts, and the enslaved families were scattered across Louisiana like broken glass. I was purchased by the Tremaine family, who were known for treating their enslaved workers with at least a degree of human decency. It was a vast improvement, and I was grateful for the chance to use my skills in a home where cruelty was not the daily language. But I never forgot what I had learned on Plantation Tibido, that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to feed it back to those who birthed it, and that the old ways, the ways Grandmère taught me, still held enough power to deliver justice in a world that often forgot what justice looked like. The curse had run its course. The debt had been paid. And little Moses would never again fear a beating simply for being a child. That knowledge meant more to me than all the freedom papers in the world. The funeral of Hiram and Evelyn Beaumont became the least attended event in the history of St. James Parish. Word of their ghastly demise spread quickly, and no one wanted to risk exposure to whatever had killed them. Even their closest friends stayed home, sending flowers and condolences from afar. I stood at the back of the cemetery with the other enslaved people, watching the ornate coffins lowered into the ground as a handful of relatives and business partners muttered stiff prayers and tried not to breathe deeply. The scent of decay still clung to the bodies, persistent even under layers of embalming chemicals. Marie and Pierce stood beside their aunt, Mrs. Claudette Tremaine, both children pale and bewildered in their mourning clothes. At 15 and 13, they knew their parents were gone, but they could not fathom the forces that had torn the family apart. As the last shovel of earth thudded onto the coffins, I whispered a final prayer to Grandmère's spirit. "It is finished. Justice is done. Let their souls find whatever peace they can, and let their children find happier lives in this world." Within a month, the plantation was sold to a sugar merchant from New Orleans who had no desire to continue the brutal system the Bowmans had built. The new owner, Mr. Baudreau, cared only for profit and quickly made changes that eased the lives of those who remained. But those changes came too late for many. The sale meant families were torn apart, friendships shattered, long-held bonds severed in an instant. People who had lived and worked together for decades were scattered like leaves before a storm. I was fortunate to be purchased by the Tremaine family, who needed an experienced cook for their large home in Baton Rouge. Mrs. Tremaine. Claudette Tremaine was Hiram Bowman's sister, but she was as different from him as daylight is from darkness. She treated her enslaved people with gentleness that almost resembled respect, and she had always despised the cruelty that made the Beaumont plantation infamous across the parish. "Celeste," she told me the day I arrived at her home, "things will be different here. I don't believe in beating people over small mistakes, and I don't believe in tearing families apart. If you work honestly and do your duties, you'll be treated fairly." It was a promise she kept for all the years I served in her household. The Tremaine family was far from perfect. They still owned human beings, still lived within the rotten framework of slavery, but they were as close to humane as anything I had known in the antebellum South. Marie and Pierce came to live with their aunt after the funeral, and I watched them struggle with the weight of their new reality. Marie especially seemed haunted by her parents' horrifying decline. She came to the kitchen often, eager for conversation, asking questions about the old days at Tibido and the people who had lived and died there. I could see she was trying to unravel the truth she had been too young to grasp. "Celeste," she asked one afternoon as I chopped vegetables, "do you think my parents deserve what happened to them?" It was a dangerous question, one that could have condemned me, but I saw the pain in her eyes, the dawning realization that her parents had been far from the good people she once imagined. "Miss Marie," I said slowly, "your parents were shaped by the world around them. They caused terrible pain, and pain always goes somewhere. Sometimes it goes right back to the people who created it." Marie nodded, understanding more than she dared to admit. She was a child of Louisiana, after all, where the old ways lived quietly in whispers and shadows. "Celeste," she asked again, voice lowered, "did you ever practice voodoo?" I looked at this young woman raised in privilege and wrapped in cruelty, now trying to grasp the forces that shaped her life. And I made a choice that would alter both our futures. "Miss Marie," I said, meeting her gaze, "there are powers in this world your parents never respected. Powers that see everything, remember everything, and eventually balance everything. Your parents spent 25 years causing suffering, and suffering demands an answer." Her next question cut straight to the truth. "Are you saying you were responsible for what happened to them?" I held her gaze, letting her see the truth I could never speak aloud. "I'm saying that justice takes many forms," I said softly, "and sometimes it works through the hands of people others would never suspect." Marie stared at me, her mind fitting together the pieces she had spent months gathering. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They deserved it, didn't they? What they did to little Moses and all the others. What do you think, Miss Marie?" She was quiet for a long time. When she finally answered, tears shimmered in her eyes. "I think they did horrible things to people who couldn't fight back. I think they enjoyed being cruel. And I think maybe I'm glad they're gone." It was a confession that could have ruined her if overheard. But it was also a sign that she was beginning to understand the difference between revenge and justice, between necessary consequences and senseless brutality. In the years that followed, Marie grew into a remarkable woman. She used her inheritance to support abolitionist causes, quietly funding underground railroad routes and paying lawyers to defend enslaved people seeking freedom. Pierce became a doctor, dedicating his life to healing anyone who needed him, regardless of race, wealth, or station. He opened a small clinic in New Orleans that treated enslaved people and free people of color for little or no money. His name became known across the region for compassion as much as skill. Both children were shaped by their parents' cruelty and by the terrible way that cruelty echoed back into their lives. But instead of repeating the cycle, they broke it. As for me, I continued to cook for the Tremaine household, this time using my skills to nourish rather than destroy. I never again touched the darker arts Grandmère had taught me. The price of such power was too deep a wound to bear twice. But the healing side of voodoo that I kept, herbs, prayers, quiet blessings whispered over the wounded. Word spread, and soon people came to me from miles away, when white doctors refused them when medicine failed, when despair was all they had left. Then the Civil War came and went. It brought legal freedom to millions, but not the true justice or equality so many hoped for. I lived long enough to see the end of slavery and the rise of new chains built to replace the old. In 1875, 21 years after the deaths of Hiram and Evelyn, Mrs. Tremaine freed all the people she owned. She was old, and she refused to leave her human property to her children. I was 66 years old, too old to start entirely anew, but young enough to savor freedom's taste. With my saved earnings, I bought a small house in New Orleans. I became a neighborhood cook, a healer, and an elder whose wisdom people sought out when the world confused them. They came not just for my food or my herbal cures, but for the lessons life had carved into me. It was there, in that quiet house filled with memories and worn tools, that I finally told the whole truth of what happened at Plantation Tibido. My granddaughter, Celeste Marie, who carried both my name and my spirit, came to visit one evening. She was old enough now for the truth. "Grandmere," she said as we sat on the porch watching the Mississippi glow in the sunset, "tell me about the curse you put on the Beaumont family." I looked at this young woman who had grown up free, something I had not been allowed to taste until late in life, but who needed to understand the cost paid for that freedom. And I decided the time had come to tell her everything. "Child," I began, "what I did to Hiram and Evelyn Beaumont wasn't only about revenge. It was about balance. They spent 25 years causing pain, and that pain had to be answered. The law do not ignore injustice forever." "But wasn't it wrong to kill them?" she asked softly. "Weren't you afraid of the consequences?" I was terrified. I admitted, using that kind of power always comes with a price. But I watched them torture an 8-year-old boy for spilling milk, and I knew that if I didn't act, they would go on hurting innocent people until the day they died. "What price did you pay?" my granddaughter asked. I thought about the answer for a long moment before speaking. The price was carrying their deaths with me for the rest of my life. Every day since then, I have lived with the knowledge that I took 2 human lives, even if those lives had long forfeited any claim to mercy. That weight doesn't go away. It never becomes easy. "Do you regret it?" "I regret that it was necessary," I said softly. "I regret that we live in a world where cruelty wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. I regret that Hiram and Evelyn never learned to see us as human beings worthy of compassion. But stopping them from hurting anyone else? No, child, I do not regret that." Celeste Marie nodded slowly, comprehension settling over her face like dusk. "So the power Grandmere taught you, it wasn't evil?" she asked. "Power is never good or evil by itself," I explained. "What matters is how you use it. Grandmere taught me that the law are forces of balance, not destruction. They help set things right, but they will not help you harm for the sake of harming." "How do you tell the difference?" she asked. "Justice," I said, "is about stopping harm and restoring balance. Revenge is about causing pain simply to cause pain. When I cursed Hiram and Evelyn, I didn't do it for pleasure. I did it to stop them from causing more suffering." "And it worked," she whispered. "It worked," I confirmed. "But it also taught me that such power must be used rarely and never without great necessity. The law are not servants. They are allies, and they must be respected." As the years passed and I grew older, the story of the cursed meals at Plantation Tibido transformed into legend within the voodoo circles of New Orleans. People came seeking similar curses against their oppressors, but I refused them every time. "The law helped me once," I would explain, "because the injustice was vast and the need urgent. But they are not weapons to call upon whenever we feel wronged. Most hardships must be solved through human wisdom and effort. I lived a long life. I died peacefully in my sleep in 1889 at the age of 80, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had grown up free. My funeral drew hundreds from across New Orleans. Formerly enslaved people remember the old days, free people of color I had healed, and even some white townsfolk who had come to respect my craft. But the most meaningful tribute came from Marie Beaumont, now Marie Tremaine, who had married a doctor and devoted her life to service. She had traveled from Baton Rouge to speak at my funeral. "Celeste was a woman who understood that power comes with responsibility," she said to the gathered crowd. "She used her gift to protect the innocent and stop those who harmed others. She taught me that true strength is not in the ability to hurt, but in the wisdom to know when action is necessary and in the courage to accept its cost. She was a teacher, a healer, and a guardian of justice. And even in the darkest times, she showed that there are forces in this world that will not allow evil to reign forever." My gravestone bears a simple inscription in French and English: Celeste Tibido, 1809 to 1889. She served justice one meal at a time. But stone is not my true monument. My legacy lives in the people who learned from my example, who understood that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to return it to the source that birthed it. The plantation where Hiram and Evelyn Beaumont died was never successfully farmed again. 3 separate families attempted to make the land thrive, but each encountered the same troubles: food spoiling instantly, a persistent odor of decay, and an oppressive unease that made the house unlivable. Eventually, the property was abandoned, surrendered back to the swamp that had been carved away to build it. Locals say that on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the mist rises from the bayou, you can still smell the scent of cursed food simmering in the ruins of the old kitchen. Some claim they hear the whispers of the Loire drifting through the moss, warnings of those who might mistreat the innocent. The story became a cautionary tale across Louisiana, a reminder that the world holds forces white folks could neither understand nor control. It warned cruel masters that their actions might summon consequences beyond imagination, and it gave hope to the enslaved, proof that justice could arrive from unexpected places. But for me, the greatest legacy was far simpler. It was knowing that I had used the gifts Grandmere gave me to protect an innocent child and stop 2 people who had dedicated their lives to inflicting pain. Little Moses grew into a teacher and a preacher. He used his past to teach children their worth, to remind them they deserve respect no matter what the world said. He never forgot the woman who avenged his suffering. He often spoke of the importance of defending those too small or too frightened to defend themselves. What I learned is this: the taste of justice is both bitter and sweet. Bitter for the price that must be paid, sweet for the peace that follows. It lingers long after the meal, a reminder that some hungers can only be satisfied with the most carefully prepared dishes. And sometimes, when the cause is righteous, those dishes must be seasoned with more than herbs and spices. They must carry the strength of the ancestors, the wisdom of the Loire, and the righteous fury of those who refuse to let cruelty go unanswered. That is what I learned in the kitchen of Plantation, Tibido, and it is the truth I carried with me until the day I died. Justice may travel slowly, but when it arrives, it is always perfectly seasoned. In the final years of my life, as I sat on my porch in New Orleans, watching the Mississippi River roll past like time itself, I often reflected on the strange paths justice walks, and the price demanded of those who serve it. The curse I laid upon Hiram and Evelyn Beaumont accomplished its purpose. It stopped 2 cruel souls from harming others and brought peace to the enslaved people of Tibido. But it also changed me, shaping me in ways I continue to uncover even decades later. The power Grandmere taught me was never meant to be used lightly. Every time I called upon the Loire for help, each moment I mixed my blood with herbs and graveyard dust, each whisper the old words spoken in the cemetery's darkness, I opened myself to forces that always demanded payment. And that payment never came in gold or silver. It came from me, pieces of my soul, fragments of my humanity, little by little, given up each time I served justice. I became something more than human, but also something less, an instrument for powers older and darker than anything the white world could begin to comprehend. The weight of Hiram and Evelyn's deaths settled into my bones like a fever that never fully broke, a reminder, constant as breath, of what I had done and what I had become. I carried their screams into my dreams, their pleas for mercy into my waking hours, their terror into quiet moments between heartbeats. But I also carried the memory of little Moses's tears, the sharp crack of the whip against his small back, the sight of blood flowing from wounds that no child should have ever suffered. And when I laid those memories side by side, their cruelty and his innocence, I knew I had made the right choice, even if the price was far higher than expected. In New Orleans, the Voodoo community embraced me as a mambo, a priestess whose power had been tested and whose devotion to justice was unquestionable. People came seeking my help. Curses against enemies, charm for lost lovers, healing for wounds physical and spiritual. But I was choosy about the help I offered. The Loire were not servants. They were allies, guardians of balance. I would assist those seeking true justice, but never those hungry for spite. The spirits see everything. I warn those who came to me consumed by minor grudges. They know the difference between justice and pettiness. If you try to bend their power toward cruelty, it will turn back on you. Some listened, others did not. I watched several destroy themselves with backfired curses, love spells that rotted into obsession, and healing rituals that turned toxic when invoked with impure intentions. The Loa, I learned, cared nothing for human definitions of morality. They sought only balance, cosmic equilibrium in a world that constantly teetered toward chaos. They aided those who served justice and punished those who twisted their gifts. As the years passed and the Civil War brought legal freedom to millions, I felt my role shifting. The blatant horrors of slavery faded into new, quieter forms of oppression. The sort of direct justice I dealt at the Beaumont Plantation was no longer mine to wield. Instead, I focused on healing and teaching. I taught young women how to protect themselves from predatory men, showed young men how to channel their anger into strength instead of destruction, helped families stay together in a world eager to tear them apart. My greatest lesson was always the same. Power, magical or mundane, is a responsibility. Those who can harm also carry the duty to protect. One evening, as my granddaughter Celeste Marie and I harvested herbs by moonlight, she asked, "Grandmere, how do you know when it's right to use the old magic?" I paused, considering all the times I'd been tempted to call upon the spirits and all the times I had chosen the harder path of human effort. "Child," I said finally, "you use the old magic when human justice has failed, when innocent people are suffering and no other choice remains. You use it when the need is so great that you're willing to pay the price the spirits demand." "What price?" she whispered. "Pieces of yourself." I answered truthfully. "Every time you call on powers beyond the mortal world, you yield a little of your humanity. You become something more than mortal, but also something less than fully alive." She looked at me with eyes wiser than her years. "Is that why you seem sad sometimes, even when you're helping people?" "Yes, child, exactly that. I carry the weight of every life I took, every curse I cast, every time I became an instrument for forces beyond human understanding. That burden never grows lighter, only more familiar. Do you regret it?" I let the moonlight wash over the garden before answering. "I regret that it had to be done," I said. "I regret we lived in a world where this was the only way to protect the innocent. But I do not regret doing what was needed, even knowing the price." As I aged and my connection to the spirit world deepened, visions began to come, flashes of the world after my passing. I saw the descendants of enslaved people grow into doctors, lawyers, teachers, preachers, leaders who would fight for justice in ways my generation could barely imagine. But I also saw the struggle continue, oppression changing shape, evolving into new shadows. The battle between justice and cruelty would never end, only shift. Then, in 1885, 4 years before my death, I received a visitor who forced me to face the full weight of my past. She was a young woman in her 20s, well-dressed, educated, with a bearing of someone raised in comfort. "Mrs. Tibido," she said politely, using the surname I had chosen after my freedom. "My name is Evelyn Beaumont Patterson. I believe you knew my grandmother." Her name struck me like a physical blow. This was the granddaughter of Evelyn Beaumont, the woman I had cursed to death, the child of a child born after her grandmother's soul had been taken. She carried the blood of my enemies, but also the innocence of someone untouched by the crimes of her lineage. "I knew your grandmother," I said at last, studying her for signs of the darkness that had poisoned her family. "What brings you to my home?" "I'm writing a book about my family's history," she said, settling. She settled into the chair I offered her. "About the plantation in Louisiana," she continued. "And what happened there? I've been researching for years, and I've uncovered some disturbing information about my grandparents' deaths." A cold shiver moved down my spine. "What kind of information?" I asked. "Medical records that don't add up. Witness accounts that contradict each other. Stories from former slaves that suggest my grandparents' deaths were not natural." She paused, her eyes fixed on my face. "Stories that suggest you might have been involved." I held her gaze. I had known this moment would arrive. From the instant I first mixed graveyard dust into Hiram and Evelyn's breakfast, the day justice began. And what do you plan to do with this information? I asked calmly. I want to understand the truth, she said, not to seek revenge or cause trouble. I just want to know what really happened and why. I've learned enough about my grandparents to know they were not good people. I've read accounts of their cruelty, the lives they shattered. If someone killed them, I want to know whether they deserved it. A remarkable thing for the granddaughter of my victims to say, an acknowledgement that sometimes justice requires actions beyond the boundaries of law. Miss Patterson, I said slowly, there are truths too dangerous to speak plainly, knowledge that can destroy the people who carry it. I understand, she replied softly, but lies can destroy as well. My family has lived in the shadow of my grandparents' deaths for 30 years. We've never known whether to mourn them as victims or accept that they brought their fate upon themselves. I looked at this young woman searching for answers that could reshape her entire identity. Then I made a decision that would bind our fates. Miss Patterson, I said, if I told you your grandparents died because they tortured an 8-year-old boy over spilled milk, because they treated human beings like animals for 25 years, because they enjoyed causing suffering, would that knowledge help you or harm you? She was silent a long time, weighing what I had asked. It would help me, she whispered at last. It would help me understand the stories I've heard, the fear in people's eyes when they speak of my family, and it would help me decide how to live my own life. So for the next several hours, I told Evelyn Patterson everything, every cruelty, every breaking point, every whispered word in the darkness that birthed the curse. She listened without interrupting, her face paling, but her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she sat in silence, stunned, horrified, and awakened. They deserved it, she whispered finally. God forgive me, but they deserved every moment of what happened to them. And how does knowing that change things for you? I asked. It frees me, she said, tears running down her cheeks. All my life, I feared I carried their evil in my blood. Now I know evil is a choice, not an inheritance. Justice, even supernatural justice, has its place. Her book, The Cursed Plantation, a true account of supernatural justice in antebellum Louisiana, was published in 1887. It caused a sensation across the South. Some praise it as a brave exploration of justice and the hidden history of bondage. Others condemned it as dangerous superstition, embellished to inflame old fears. But for those who knew the truth of slavery, the book was a revelation. It preserved the memory of children like little Moses and countless others who suffered and died unseen. It forced future generations to confront the real cost of cruelty and the extraordinary measures sometimes needed to protect the innocent. For me, its publication was both vindication and burden. Vindication, because it proved my actions had purpose. Burden, because it meant my secret was now a story carried beyond my lifetime. I would forever be remembered as a healer and as a woman who killed with supernatural power. The Voodoo community in New Orleans was split. Some celebrated the validation. Others feared government scrutiny and suppression. But the broader African-American community embraced the book. It became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that enslaved people were never as powerless as history tried to insist. The enslaved had always found ways to fight back. I lived 2 more years after the book's release, long enough to see its influence. Young people came asking to learn the old ways, not for vengeance, but for healing. Scholars arrived from northern universities, desperate to record traditions fading as the old generation died. And descendants of enslaved people came to thank me, not for the curse, but for protection and courage it symbolized. When I died in 1889, hundreds attended my funeral. They came not just to mourn me, but to honor the life of a woman who had used her gifts to shield the innocent. The eulogy was delivered by Marie Beaumont Tremaine, daughter of the very people I had destroyed, and a woman who had grown into a force for good. She stood before the crowd and said, Celeste Tibido understood that justice is not always gentle. She knew that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to meet it with a power it cannot withstand. She paid a terrible price for what she did, but she paid it willingly because she understood that some things matter more than personal peace. She was a teacher she showed us that knowledge is power, but power must always be wielded responsibly. She was a healer who understood that the deepest wounds sometimes require the strongest medicine. And she was a guardian, one who protected those who could not protect themselves, even when that protection demanded the sacrifice of pieces of her own soul. We remember her not as a killer, but as a protector, not as someone who sought violence, but as someone who chose justice when every other option had failed. Marie Tremaine's voice trembled slightly as she continued. Her legacy lives on in every person who refuses to accept cruelty as inevitable, in every voice that speaks for the voiceless, in every hand that reaches out to lift those who've been wronged. My gravestone-born inscription in 3 languages, English, French, and the old tongue grandmère had taught me. Celeste Tibido, 1809 to 1889. She served justice with her hands and her heart, but the true monument to my life was not carved in stone. It lived in the lives of those who learned from my example, who used their own gifts, whatever they were, to serve justice in their own time. The plantation where Hiram and Evelyn Beaumont met their fate remained cursed long after my death. Locals reported that food spoiled instantly in the ruins of the old kitchen, that on certain nights, the air grew thick with the smell of decay, that the presence of a wall moved like a shadow through the abandoned halls. Eventually, the property was donated to the Catholic Church, which built a school for children of all races on the site. The priest reported no disturbances at all. The curse, it seemed, had been satisfied by transforming a place of cruelty into a place of hope. The story of the cursed meal spread through Louisiana as legend, whispered across generations, a reminder that there were powers in this world beyond the reach of those who believed themselves untouchable, a warning to the cruel, a quiet spark of hope for the oppressed. But perhaps the most important legacy of Plantation Tibido was the understanding it provided about the true nature of power and responsibility. The ability to harm is also the obligation to protect, and those who possess knowledge or strength, whether magical or mundane, carry a duty to use them wisely. The law had taught me that justice was not revenge, not cruelty repaid with cruelty, but the restoration of balance in a world shattered by oppression. They taught me that sometimes the only way to stop evil was to return to the ones who had created it, season with righteous anger, and serve with the ancient wisdom of those who understood the cost of power. The taste of that justice had been both bitter and sweet, bitter for the sacrifices required, sweet for the peace that followed. It lingered long after the final meal was served, a reminder that some hungers can only be satisfied to the most carefully prepared dishes. And in the end, that was enough. Not perfect justice, not full redemption, but enough to prove that cruelty will not go unanswered forever. Enough to prove that there are forces, human and spiritual, that rise to protect the innocent when institutions fail them. Enough to show that sometimes the greatest magic is simply refusing to accept injustice as an unchangeable truth. The broken boy once beaten for spilling milk grew into a man who protected children from similar cruelty. The cursed plantation became a school where young minds learned freely, regardless of race. And the woman who once served death with her hands became a legend, a reminder, an inspiration for others who demanded justice in their own ways. That was the true harvest of the seeds I planted in those cursed meals. Not the death of 2 cruel people, but the transformation of cruelty into compassion, of oppression into opportunity, of despair into hope. It was a harvest that nourished souls long after we were all gone. Proof that justice, like good food, is best when shared with those who need it most. The law had taught me well, and I had served them faithfully. The debt was paid, the balance restored, and the innocent, at last, were protected. In the end, that is all any of us can ever hope to claim, that we left the world just a little more just than we found it, one meal at a time. Historical note: while the events in this tale are fictional, they reflect the very real cruelty that plagued many antebellum plantations, especially in Louisiana, where African spiritual traditions survived despite heavy suppression. Practices often labeled voodoo, more properly Vodou or hoodoo, were indeed used by enslaved people as tools of resistance, protection, and empowerment. Documented cases are rare due to secrecy, but the tradition of spiritual resistance remains a vital part of African American history. The transformation of plantation sites into schools and community centers was also a real pattern during Reconstruction, as formerly enslaved communities sought to build hope from the ashes of oppression. Celeste's story reminds us that justice takes many forms, and that the most powerful resistance often comes from those the oppressors never imagined they should fear. Her willingness to sacrifice parts of herself to protect vulnerable children stands as a testament to the lengths people will go to defend those who cannot defend themselves. If these stories of spiritual resistance move you, consider supporting organizations that preserve African American spiritual traditions and the historical voices of those who fought oppression in all its forms.